Hi, everyone. My name is John Miller, president of Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center, and I'd like to welcome you to the last webinar of our series, The Best of Two Worlds. We would like to acknowledge the First Peoples who, for thousands of years before us, were and are still the keepers and caretakers of this land where we now live and work. We're dedicated to honoring the Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and in particular for Muskoka, all four cultures, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Métis that inhabited these lands either currently or historically. We recognize all the generations of Indigenous people and their historic connection to this place, and we are grateful for the opportunity to gather here at this time. So, as I said, welcome to our final episode in this series. I would like to thank all of our contributors and speakers so far, our sponsor, Green Rock Capital Partners, and you, the audience, for all the support that we've received over the past 5 weeks. A special thank you to Norman Yan and the Friends of Muskoka Watershed for your collaboration with thought leaders in the national Indigenous community to deliver this series, stimulating and educating us all on sustainability perspectives. So far, the feedback has shown our speakers are achieving our objectives, causing us to think differently and bringing a new understanding of how Indigenous cultural practices can help us sustain our environment. We will open our new exhibit, Miskowaki Confluence of Cultures, at the Muskoka Discovery Center in 2023 for local, national, and international visitors. This exhibit will weave Indigenous culture and sustainability values into the fabric and identity of the Muskoka Discovery Center and will serve as an example for similar collaborations throughout Canada. So today, during our webinar, we encourage you, the audience, to post questions in our Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and we will read them to the presenter. If your question's been posted, or if you'd like someone else's question, just click like beside that, and it'll be moved up in priority. We can't answer all the questions that we have, so if you email us any questions that to the address that Jordan posts in the chat, we'll try and get those answers back to you. The last 4 webinars, we've attracted over 700 registrants, and today we have over 200 registered for this final episode. So amazing engagement so far, so thank you for that. We're most fortunate to have Henry Lickards as our final speaker. Henry is educated in both the traditional practices and Western science and is an outstanding communicator in bringing both worlds together. For a proper introduction, I'd like to hand this over to Dr. Norman Yan. Norm.
Thank you, John, and thank you everyone for staying with us for these webinars to our final wonderful concluding webinar today. I'm sure you all use Google. You may not have used the app Google Scholar. If you search on Henry Lickards' names in Google Scholar, you'll find a collection of his scholarly writings and talks and see why he is really the perfect knowledge holder to give the concluding webinar in our series today. Henry is a member of the Seneca Nation Turtle Clan. He's been married for over 50 years and has 3 grown children and 2 granddaughters that he's very proud of. He's been the director of the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, the Department of the Environment, for 34 years and served for 6 years as Senior Environmental Science Officer. At present, he's the first Indigenous Canadian Commissioner on the International Joint Commission, one of 3 commissioners representing Canada and protecting the waters. Just to give you a sense for what else Henry's been about over his very active life, he was the principal investigator on a project called The Effect on Aboriginals in the Great Lakes Environment Project, on the Nationalized Knowledge Systems Project, which I read about, found on Google Scholar. Both of these projects investigated First Nations environmental issues. But he's had many other commitments, including co-chair of the Kosciuszko Aboriginal Subcommittee that protects endangered wildlife in Canada, member of the Science and Technology Advisory Council to Environment Canada, co-chair of the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force, vice president on the board of directors of the St. Lawrence River Institute of Environmental Science, a group that does phenomenal scientific work. He was on the board of directors of the Eastern Ontario Model Forest. He was the co-chair for science of the Assembly of First Nations Environment Committee. He's been a board member of the IJC, now progressing to commissioner, a member of the panel on ecological integrity for Canada's national parks, a member of the Science Advisory Committee of the Northern River Basin Study, and a board member of the Canadian Environmental Assessment Research Council. Talk about being immersed in multiple knowledge systems. I turn the floor over to you, Henry.
No, I'm really quite happy to be here to speak to you today. After an introduction like that, I don't know. I still put my pants on one leg at a time. I can't jump right into them, I tell you. No, it's been a very exciting time in my life, and I'm really happy to be here. I was here a while back and gave you a similar talk about water and at the summits that have been done in Muskoka. I also have a cottage in Muskoka as well with my wife and I, and we enjoy going to Muskoka all the time, taking my kids there and just enjoy the place immensely. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about how we relate Indigenous knowledge, and I'm going to share with you some of my some slides that may help explain some of this. These words that come before all else are usually the openings that we do for every meeting we have. And I put it up here because I think it's important to talk about how Native people and how our histories and different things and ceremonies that we do may differ from you as well. But it really does show who we are and what we are. And so this opening address is what is done by Haudenosaunee people, but Anishinaabe and many of the other nations do something similar at the beginning of a meeting. And what it's to do is it's to bring your minds together. It's to make you think about those important things. With ours, we say that whenever we are gathered, one of us chosen to give greetings and thanksgiving. And the first thing, of course, that we think about are the people. You know, our families, our communities, the nations that we belong to, and those people are near and dear to us. And so we thank them. We say thank you for being there. We also look at the Mother Earth as she continues to carry out her responsibilities. And every speaker that would speak it may use this order, the order of the things as being important. But they can combine things and make it their own. And so it's used at the beginning of meetings, like I said. And a normal response for among the Haudenosaunee is that when a person says, I'd like to give thanks to, for example, the plants of the world and how much they give to us and all of the different things and medicines and food that they give to us. The speaker will say, you know, let us bring our minds together and think about those plants. And can we agree that they are important to us? Among non-native people, I know that you guys are quite shy because you usually don't say anything, you don't do anything. But among the Haudenosaunee people, what happens is when the speaker gets to that point and pauses, everybody goes, yeah, well, I agree, that's really important to me. And so there's a general explanation about how important the things are. It's interesting that as the people agree, your audiences agree with the importance of each thing that we see in this list, what happens is that it gives you that feeling that everybody else agrees with you, that the environment and these things are most important to them as well. And so you go into the meeting already having, we'll say 14, 20 different things that you agree on. And that makes it much easier as you're going through. I know that this Thanksgiving address, it looks long, but when a speaker does it, you know, maybe 10, 15 minutes, but it reminds us of what's important. The longest I've ever seen it done was almost 3 hours, in which the speaker went into great detail on each one of the issues here. So when he got to the fish he was naming them, like I agree with the perch are taste wonderful and their population is good. The shortest I've ever seen it done was done on a business type of meeting in which there was a discussion on on this type of format. And the speaker, an elder, got up and said, "I'd like to thank everything in creation because we need all of these gifts to help us in the tasks that we have. Can we agree that the universe is important to us?" And it was over. It was done. But it's important that we keep reminding ourselves that these type of things are important among Haudenosaunee people. The other reason I put it up is because it becomes very much an environmental framework. So, for example, at Akwesasne, this Thanksgiving address is used in order to carry out environmental assessments on any project that we have. So if we're building a road or a gas station or some type of manufacturing plant, it has to go through this guideline in order that people see, is the earth going to be affected? What about the geology, geomorphology? Are the waters going to be affected? Are the flows going to be there? Are the fishes going to be affected? What plants have to be removed or enhanced? And so we work those right into our environmental assessment so that we make sure that we fulfill our responsibilities. As we go down the list, they're all pretty straightforward until you start to get down towards the bottom. There you're talking about the four winds or the weather that you have in an area. And that's very important to know, especially the different types of extremes that you might get and how you have to design for them. The thunderers are those grandfathers that warn us if the world is changing. So during this time of climate change, those grandfathers become very important to us. Interesting, just a slight aside in that we have a ceremony called a thunder ceremony because in the fall, the grandfathers get tired of snow and stuff and they want to go live in Florida where it's nice and warm. And so we bid farewell to the grandfathers in September, October, when we hear the last thunder. And then we welcome them back in the spring when they come back to see us again, usually about May or June at that time. But what we've been finding lately is the distance between when we send them away and when we welcome them back is getting smaller and smaller. And last year, for example, it was well into December before the last thunder was heard. And it was almost the beginning of February when we heard thunder again. And to us, that's a serious change in the world. It would be like changing Christmas Day because of something that's happening in the environment. And so our people see those signs and say, hey, we have to be quite vigilant about this. Of course, the sun we recognize as our elder brother, and the grandmother moon represents all female things in this world. So we must keep those in mind when we're designing these things and make sure that our women are taken care of. The stars represent the aunties and uncles, and they don't like a lot of light. They like coming out when it's dark. And so we use that, for example, in dark skies. How do we make sure that we're not lighting up the world, which would interfere with the animals and insects in our communities? And so we change things and use science in order to make and accommodate the night skies. Of course, we also believe in the spiritual world, and that spiritual world is important to us. And so there are certain ceremonies that we carry out in order that a project be good and continue to work. Those spirits will also come to us sometimes and remind us that there are things that are necessary in that plot. A number of times as a biologist and send my botanist out, and we found that the medicine plants on that plot of land that was, for example, going to be a home were exactly the type of plants that those people needed, because they had those illnesses within their family. And it was interesting to me that I keep thinking to myself, how did the plants know to go to that spot and be there? Because they seem to know that that person requires a certain type of plant. We know that we celebrate the teachers and elders because their knowledge helps us when we're working. And so we're always in touch with our elders, asking for histories, for special things that might have gone on. And don't worry, that can be, for example, somebody burying trash someplace that we want to put up a building or something. That may be very important to that building and its foundations. Lastly, of course, we always celebrate the Creator, and far be it for me as a mere individual to tell the Creator whether it's male, masculine, or feminine, or something else. I can't tell the Creator that, but I can honor the Creator for whoever it is, in order that the things that I see around us are important. So this words that come before all else are not just an opening, but they're also a framework by which we can judge many things within our community. That's one of the tools that we use. And it's interesting that as I've worked with the Model Forest and the St. Lawrence River Institute, they've been adopting some of this. So, for example, they do openings and closings of their meetings the same way we do. And what they found is it brings people's mind together to start thinking about those important things. I wanted to go through just a brief history of some stuff here, just so that everybody's sort of on the same page. And what I'm going to say to you is that don't go running to Google or what do you call it, Wikipedia, for the accuracy of this. The reason why is that this is all what I'll be telling you is information that's come to me through my grandmother and grandfather and my great grandmothers and those type of people. So I know when I went to university many years ago now, it was always minded, I was always bothered by the impression that there was nobody living in North America. They kept telling me that there was 20 people running around all of North America, and had no organization, nothing. And my people have been here for thousands of years. And I know that because of the stories that my grandmother and my great grandmother told me about. So I would say to you that the modern history that's going on, every year that I've looked at the data and looked at the information, it keeps getting bigger and bigger and going back farther and farther. Like I said, when I was in university, maybe 10,000 years at the most, that there were people. But now we're back to 40, 50, 60,000 years, 70,000 years ago. And the stories that my grandmother told me talked about the ice that was here. And that was 15,000 years ago. And then before the ice, here's the way that we lived. And so I have all of these stories that I grew up with that told me sort of a history of North America that was quite different from what I had been taught. So again, in order to reconcile those things, you start to look at the history and say, as a biologist, what does this story tell me about the landscape that happened at that time? And what I have found is that as I hear the descriptions in the stories, the different stories that are told to me, I can start to imagine what that landscape looked like, and then compare that to the timescales, for example, for the ice ages that occurred. And it'd be interesting that some of the early stories of the Haudenosaunee, we have some about the flying heads or fierce stories about that in the past. We talk about hearing the river roar when, for example, the ice sheet that covered most of the Great Lakes split and the St. Lawrence River was created. And that's thousands of years ago, and yet there were people here that understood it. It's interesting to me that my grandmother and great grandmother used to talk about the Haudenosaunee coming from the deep south, and that we lived among a people who were called the people of stone. And they were a cruel people, that they actually killed and ate people, as they said, and that they kept slaves, and that they were really quite bad. But what happened was the world and the elder brother, the son, got ashamed of their activity, and he turned his face away from us. And what happened was this great, huge ice change occurred, and the ice sheets moved from the north south. And as they did, it changed the whole climate of those areas that were far to the south, and their societies collapsed. The Haudenosaunee people who were there at the time then began to migrate north. And of course, what they took with them was corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters. And they carried those with us as we moved north. And it's interesting because she said that around the Mason-Dixon line in the United States, there was she didn't call it the Mason-Dixon line, it's just that I've been able to figure out where those rivers come together, was where she said, we had a huge discussion between all of the people that were moving north. And the discussion was whether we would keep slaves or not. And so the Haudenosaunee, or the Proto-Iroquoian peoples, they said, no, we'll never bend our necks to anyone. And bending the neck literally meant that you bent your neck so that the person that was sacrificing you could break your neck cleaner with a war club. And so our people continued on north until we came into the Great Lakes. And again, that's probably 9,000, 10,000 years ago. And the ice had just started leaving, and we have stories about the time when we came up here. Interesting one about mosquitoes that were 7 feet tall, and how we had to fight them because we couldn't come up and settle in the St. Lawrence River Valley at that time because of these huge insects that lived here. And so those stories were the stories that I heard when I was very young. I was a sickly child, so I had to stay home with my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my grandfather, and sort of take care of the house with them. And so I got to hear all of these stories, which many of my cousins and others didn't hear. And I can remember those stories really quite well, and I'm trying to put them down so I can talk to my own grandchildren about them. But when I look at the history of North America, I see that elder time really was probably about 30 to 40,000 years ago. And it was probably among the Toltecs, the Amotecs, and those that lived in the way down in the Latin America, and where Guatemala and Panama and all of those countries are today, where these great civilizations existed. And my grandfather said that we were the people that actually built those structures, and we built them out of stone. And when we did that, that made the people cruel. And so the Haudenosaunee promised that they would never make their own houses out of stone again. And that's when we were able to leave the south and gradually move north. Again, when about 600 years ago, we sent out runners from the territories in Akwesasne and along the St. Lawrence River Valley to the other nations in North America, explaining that these new people had arrived. And from the south, we heard from the Choctaw and the Cherokee and various people like that about these people coming up from the south. And so again, runners were sent out across the country to inform the other nations that they were there. And I think at that time it was the black robes or the priests that were coming. And from the south, we had been notified that a new disease had hit North America called rabies now. And we knew all about how that would infect people. And so again, these type of networks of information were passed across the country in different ways. We also went through the War of Independence with the United States, War of 1812 and around there as well. And in the War of 1812, we convinced both the British and the Americans that they both won the war. And really, the only people that won the War of 1812 was the Haudenosaunee, because either side could have wiped us out completely. But we were able to ally ourselves back and forth across the border and keep this check and balance in place that allowed both countries to survive. During the Civil War, my grandmother told me the stories about the Underground Railway. And to her, the Underground Railway was actually a steam car that traveled under the ground. To her, that's the way she saw it. And that the people who were using that Underground Railway were fleeing because they were being kept as slaves. So when they arrived in North America, or when they arrived in Canada and on the St. Lawrence River, the Haudenosaunee, who agreed that there shouldn't be any slaves, accepted them and brought them into the Haudenosaunee. Now, because we were allied with Britain at the time, and these were, how did they put it, God-fearing people, because they joined the church right away as soon as they got into Canada, and immediately enfranchised themselves. So they were no longer Haudenosaunee, who was taking care of them and adopted them, but they now became British subjects. And when they did that, they were able to then live in Canada and actually go back to the United States because now they were British subjects that had to be protected. So there were all of these stories that I heard. We heard about the 1834 when the Mohawk Nation Council of Chiefs at Akwesasne actually went to the British to intervene against the building of the Beauharnois control structures because it would cause environmental damage to the area and to the fish that we depended upon. I think maybe that was the first environmental assessment done on a project. And of course, at that time, there was no even word for environment. And so our people, they were promised a lot of money for it, but as far as I know, the money was never received. But again, they made their appeals on the grounds of environmental damage. You see the same appeals happening in 1948 and into the 60s over the construction of the St. Lawrence Seaway and the problems that were there during that construction with our people and the St. Lawrence people that were there. I'm using the St. Lawrence River as the focus because I know the most about that area and the most about the people there. My people, like I said, come from Brantford as well, but also from upstate New York, where my family's, ancient families come back about 50 generations back. So again, all of these stories are the things that I heard about how the knowledge of our people about the land. And we tried very hard to tell the non-native people who were arriving in North America at that time about how to care for the land. And so you've heard this continuous theme about how to care for the land, what we have to watch out for, and how we have to be ever vigilant as we live upon the land. In 1976, the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne started its Department of the Environment. And it again was to look at all of the environmental problems in Akwesasne. And at that time, I was hired as a researcher for them, as a biologist. And I felt very much at home coming to Akwesasne because they were Mohawk people. I'm a Seneca though, but we're two elder brothers of the Haudenosaunee. And so again, we were able to work together and build a Department of the Environment still running today. And again, it's still looking after those issues and we're still notifying our neighbors about them. The problem, the way in which we worked at the Department of the Environment was to blend traditional knowledge and scientific knowledge into a solution, for example, for the issues that we had. And we had many. from water flows, contaminants. Some of our own lands were flooded, and all of the different things that were occurring in the St. Lawrence River. In 1985, the RAP started, and again, those remedial action plans were looking at specific hotspots in the Great Lakes, and we were trying to clean them up. And since that time, there have been many of those problems and issues that we've been dealing with. But we've also had to work with the provincial government and the provincial and state governments in Canada and the two federal governments in order to look at some of these problems. So it's not not without some trepidation when you call a meeting, and you have to invite people from each one of those jurisdictions plus their people. A meeting on water, you could end up being 40 or 50 people. And I well know that now as a member of the International Joint Commission, how many people need to be brought to the table and informed and talked with about those areas of concern. However, it wasn't always pleasant within Akwesasne. As the environment degraded and people couldn't eat fish, couldn't do trapping because of water level flows, and because of the many different things that occurred in time, the traditional economies of Akwesasne began to collapse. In 1978, for example, the Mohawk Council issued an edict to its people saying for women of childbearing age, pregnant women, and children under the age of 16 consume no fish species from the St. Lawrence River because of the high levels of different types of contaminants there. And when that happened, a major source of economy for the Mohawk Council and for the Mohawk people disappeared. Fluorides from the United States were polluting the land and killing the cattle. That was again a mainstay. Remember that the Haudenosaunee people, my people, or the Iroquois people, as you sometimes call us, were agricultural people. And so we depended upon agriculture to sustain our populations. And so we again saw these problems and again tried to notify the governments around us about them. And in many cases, there was a lot of people that we worked with in order to make sure that they understood how much impact was there. Those discussions are still going on today. And I like to think that with the Truth and Reconciliation and with the different things that we've worked on over time, it's beginning to bear fruit. People are beginning to look at the environment. They're beginning to look at Indigenous people as being partners with them in how to clean up some of these problems. So the remedial action plans are still going on. We're getting rid of some of those kind of problems that we've had. And we're moving towards a time when some of those areas of concern may be able to be delisted. But in 1990, it would look really terrible because in 1990, we literally had a civil war in Akwesasne because of the collapse of the traditional economies and the incoming of the non-traditional ones. And when that occurred, again, even Canada and the United States had to come into Akwesasne in order to maintain the peace. Since 1990, we've seen probably in the order of $2 to $3 billion spent on policing in our areas. And I like to think that, boy, if somebody gave me $3 billion in 1976, we probably could have cleaned up the whole St. Lawrence River and got all of the areas done rather than put the money into policing a place where people who still have a tradition of the environment are. We also helped our neighbors. We helped start the St. Lawrence River Institute and were on their boards from the beginning. We also started with the Eastern Ontario Model Forest, another group of people who wanted to work at sustainable forestry. So again, this map that I see here tells me that this is, a small map of North America, but it's also a history of how people moved into these areas. And this map was never static. it was always moving, always people going to different areas. And so when we draw a line on a map, we tend to think of it the same way you think of lines in Europe, that once the line is drawn on the ground, that line can't move either direction. In North America, they moved all over the place. And yet you can't find really large cemeteries of our people that died in war. And so before the contact, these people lived, our people lived in relative harmony among each other and didn't have those great wars that spread across Europe and even into Asia. And so I look at the newcomers when they came, they brought with them this rule of kings, this rule of power as the way in which they were going to establish their governments. And that was in direct conflict with the people that were here who were looking to see how we could live in peace with not only ourselves, but with the environment around us. So again, that's a brief history of who we are and how we operate, but it might give you a clue as to some of the things that we can transport over that may be helpful in this time that we're living in. We also talk about traditional knowledge, and over the years, the academics are starting to see it as a new area of research. And I call these the myths of environmental or traditional knowledge, because a lot of times I read some stuff like this and it just makes me think, well, I can't understand this. One of the first ones I always hear is, well, you're native, so only you can have traditional knowledge. And I'm here to tell you today that that's not true. Everyone who lives on the land or who lives in an area gains traditional knowledge about their area. May not go back far, but they have to gain knowledge about how to live in an area. And so the people who live longest on the land and closest to the land are the ones that have the deepest traditional knowledge about that land. And again, they are the ones that can hold that knowledge for you. But I look at my friends, some of the French burbot fishermen in the St. Lawrence, and some of the fishermen and trappers and hunters that were not native people, but lived on the land with our people. They gained that knowledge as they lived with us, and they were welcomed by our people. There's a lot of talk about traditional ecological knowledge being lost or needs to be saved. Well, yeah, but we saved traditional knowledge in different ways. We saved it in the jellyware in our heads. We saved it in our stories and the things that we told to each other. We saved it in people who were skilled in that area. So the hunters would save the knowledge of animals and those. The women would save knowledge about seeds and how to preserve them. Lots of people saved knowledge about agriculture and how to do sustainable agriculture. We also say that they say that it can be stored in books and databases, and I would say yes, some of it can be stored that way, but not all of it, because in this society we don't really have good spiritual ways of serving that. And by writing them in a book, I know I get the request all the time when I do an opening. They say, "Oh, can you write that down for us?" And to Haudenosaunee, we say, if it's important to remember, then remember it. You don't need to write it down. If you hear it and it's important, you should remember it yourself, because that's your responsibility to that knowledge that you own and keep in yourselves. What else happens is that people say, oh, well, it only belongs to the native people and you shouldn't steal it. Well, I think what they're talking about is that you shouldn't abuse it. You know, if you take knowledge from someplace and you use it for your own profit, well, that's not using it in the spirit to which it was given to you. And it's something that our elders, have a lot of hard times with, because they do want to share knowledge with people, but they just want to make sure that you honor the knowledge as much as they do. Sometimes I've heard it that they say that it's static and doesn't change. Well, changes all the time. You know, as the world changes, we have to change. Some of the stories may stay much the same, but the knowledge that goes with them doesn't. And so sometimes we lose some, sometimes we gain some. I also heard people say that traditional knowledge doesn't use or need science. I think traditional knowledge is science. It's just that we have different words for how we use it. We set up hypotheses. You can't not go hunting and not set up a hypothesis that says, I think the animals will be here. And then you go test it. You go out to that area, you observe, you do all of the things that are necessary in order to see if the animals are still there. And then you test it further by hunting and saying, yep, I got a deer, or no, I didn't get a deer. Well, then the knowledge, your understanding of the knowledge must be suspect. They also tell me that traditional knowledge is anecdotal. It's always stored in stories. But I've gone to the big libraries and I've looked through all of the books that I could look at and enjoyed looking at them. And what do those books tell me? They tell me stories. Scientific journal is nothing but a whole great number of stories about how knowledge was discovered. And yes, you have a pattern for it. That is of how a journal article is to be written and how it's to be put forward and how the thinking has to be there. Well, a lot of the legends and stories are told in the same manner. They have to have a pattern. They have to have all of the facts there. And they're told in that manner so that you will remember what the story says. I always laugh when I hear that they say, well, those stories aren't objective. Well, yes, they are objective. It's just that you have to learn how to interpret them and understand how they work. So again, we, as Native people, when I look at traditional knowledge and how we deal with it, I see a lot of the similarities with the sciences. A lot of our knowledge is stored in a different way, so that it's much more ready usable by people that need it. Yes, tea cakes can sometimes be more spiritual and mystical than factual, but that's because we have a whole other set of instruments that can be used in a mystical and a spiritual way, not just the factual ones. So like a scientist has test tubes and different machines in order to measure, we also have ceremonies and rites and different things that we use in order to feel and taste the spiritual and mystical areas around us. And we know them and we use those things in order to be able to enhance us living within the world. But we also use the factual things. And lastly, that traditional knowledge is the same all over the world, whether in the US or Canada or any place, it's the same. So I, as a holder of traditional knowledge, you can take me up to the Arctic and drop me on ice floe and I'll survive. And I tell you what, no, I won't. The great white bear will probably eat me because he doesn't know who I am. How do we deal with each other? My grandfather used to say that whenever you want to see what a country has the most problems with, see what they brag about. The Haudenosaunee were a very warlike people, and we received the great way of peace from the peacemaker, and we've been battling with it ever since. We talk about peace all the time. We talk about how to build peace, how to deal with each other. And so we use 3 words that I've translated here for you, but they're all now verbs. So respect is a verb. You need to have understanding and communication, consensus building, mediation, honor in order to build respect. If you're going to want to do something together, you need equity. So in this world, we look to finance, but we also know that knowledge, networks, people who can do the work, the social power is just as important. And then we empower ourselves to go out and do what needs to be done. And we accept responsibility for what's there. And what we say is, once we've done that, we gain more respect for each other. We are willing to put more equity on the table, and we empower ourselves to do more. And that cycle of peace increases. Again, like I said, our languages are different in that the Haudenosaunee languages are all verb-based languages. And so everything to us is an active process in which you carry it out and do it. And so, for example, this great way of peace, all of these are verbs that move forward that way of peace. We've used it for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. Interesting to me that Thomas Jefferson came to Onondaga when the Great Way of Peace was being recited and listened to it and incorporated it into the American Constitution. My grandfather also, who was a great man to read those type of governance issues, also told me that Das Kapital, the Communist Manifesto, also has reference to the Haudenosaunee. He spells it wrong, of course, but he was European, never been here. But he talked about this group of people in North America who practice a primal form of communism that was the basis for the modern concept of communism. So my granddad used to say, we gave the world the two greatest forms of government, and they buggered them both up. So again, our people and our knowledge has been used over the period of time. Also, I wanted to get a plug in for the IJC so you can see those faces. I know sometimes it's not, we are, as a commissioner, you're just commissioner way away someplace. But these are my friends. I consider them my friends now. Pierre Bellin, I've known for a long period of time, who's helped work at Akwesasne on, for example, beluga whales in the St. Lawrence. But he looked at eels in our area because that was one of the ways in which the contaminants were being transported down the river to the belugas that feasted on them, and thereby weren't able to reproduce. Marilyn Fell, I've known for years and years, and her and I used to argue all the time because she's a lawyer and she works on land claims, and we used to get into it sometimes and worked on it. And so I've known those three for quite a long time. On the other side, Pierre Bellin is the co-chair. Jane Corwin is the co-chair on the American side, and Rob Sisson and Lance Yohe. Each of them have different skill sets that are necessary in order to bring to the table so we can discuss issues with people that understand the workings of both countries. Jane's knowledge of the inner workings of the government on US side is, I think, second to none. And I look to her for that advice as we move through some of these sticky issues. Rob has worked with NGOs and understands how people relate to it and has a specific understanding of those type of things and looks really quite well at governance, an issue that I sometimes have trouble with. Lance Yohe, he was actually studying theology, and him and I get on quite well because we can discuss not the angels on the head of the pin, but how we can work together. This commission was established in 1919 and has been running since under the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1906. And so it's been out there for a long period of time. And we work, the way we come to decision is through consensus and how we build that consensus among ourselves. For me, that's not unusual. I work with the traditional council of my people, the Sacred Circle of 50 Chiefs, who always work with consensus. And so I've been able to bring some of those mechanisms to the IJC, and with the commissioners, I hope we've been able to come to some good decisions. We also have staff. I've got there the Ottawa office and the Washington office, and then one in Windsor, which is a regional office. Plus, we have many boards and committees that work on different things that issues that we have within the Great Lakes. However, IJC has taken under its wing that we will be looking and collaborating with Indigenous people. And like I said, I'm the first Indigenous person to sit on those boards as a commissioner in that 150 years. And many of our other boards have maybe one or two, but with this commission, the new commission, those new commissioners, one of our priorities is to make sure that all of our boards have designated seats for Indigenous members, that we have capacity to engage. We have the International Watersheds Initiative program that tries to enhance that, to enhance communication and involvement with our Indigenous people, and to offer more opportunities for sharing knowledge. And I must admit that I was a little bit of trepidation at the beginning with my other commissioners because I didn't know how they would embrace this. But when we got to discuss this issue, I suddenly found that everyone on the board, on the commission, wants to do this and has made it a priority among our people. And so I'm happy to say that we are progressing with that. Another instrument that you heard many times is talking about the concept of time and working for the 7 generations. And I've been asked many times, why? Why 7? Well, it's because you can know 7 generations. I knew my great-grandmother, I knew my grandmother and my mother. I know my children. I also know my 2 grandchildren. And hopefully maybe sometime I'll know my great-grandchildren. But I stand in the center, and those are my family. Those are my immediate family that I care about. So why wouldn't I care for 7 generations? All 7 of those generations are important to me, and the ones that come to the future as well. So again, the concept of 7 generations can be that mean moving through time as we live upon this land. I included here some intriguing books that I've read over the period of time that have stimulated my thinking about Indigenous people. And so I leave them with you. I'll leave them up. I think you might be able to see them. But each of those books has a slightly different approach to the way that the world was taught to me when I went to university. Man's Voice, the Civilization, talks about Native people in North America and talks about the Haudenosaunee people. American Genesis actually said that the land bridge went the other way. The Americans, the Native people in America, went over to Asia and started the whole thing going off that way. And that makes a Haudenosaunee man feel very happy that we have somebody thinking that way. 1491, some of you might have heard about, but it's again talks about the North America in that time. Thomas King's book, The Inconvenient Indian, while not a history, as he said, a curious account. And The Journey into North America just recently was published in Scientific American about the genetic and archaeological discoveries and the new story about how the continent is here. So it's interesting to me that when I went to university, they literally almost told me that everything was known about us and about North America. And yet we're pushing the time back farther and farther, and the number of people who lived here. So I leave these books with you, but I think that we're in a time when we can look to each other for our knowledge that we have. And I would say to you that as a Native person, all my life has been spent trying to outreach, not only to you, but all of the people in this world. And so with the title for your, The Best of Two Worlds, I would say to you that it's not just 2 worlds, it's many worlds that are out there. When I was young, I had a friend of mine that I could consider a very good friend, a very good teacher. It just happened to be a badger. And I could talk to him and he would listen and he smelled me and he knew that I was there. And I was sure that if I listened close enough to him, I could understand what the badger was thinking. And towards the end of our meeting, I always remember he would bob his head and then he would go back into his burrow. And it was like, then I knew that the conversation was over and that I could be on my way. But how many times as biologists, as people, have we had that feeling about the animals around us? How many times as a gardener felt that the plants that they were caring for they could actually feel them talking to them? All of us have felt that in some way at some time. And I say to you that those are some of those spiritual and mystical tools that the Haudenosaunee people use to understand the world around us and also to work together with our neighbors. So thank you for listening to me.
Miigwech, thank you, Henry, for this very inspiring and thought-provoking journey you took us on today by helping us recognize that working together with many, many eyes and minds, we can solve some of the world's problems. Earlier today, you did mention you like to answer questions, so we have some waiting for you. The first question is going to be a two-parter, and it is, who are the four sacred beings and how would they guide the environmental discussion?
Well, the four sacred beings are really very powerful beings. And so I can't tell you what their names are because there's that we give them names, but that's not their name. And what we say is that if we're ever in a quandary, that we have a question in our mind that seems so unsolvable, what happens is we put out that call to the universe around us. It's not a prayer, but it's a message that we broadcast. And those four sacred beings are the ones here that are responsible for us. So they come to us and they sort of stand and walk around us. And as they walk around us, they sing. And sometimes when you're sitting there just thinking really hard and you get that aha moment, suddenly you go, oh, there's the solution. What we say is that you just heard, let's say, a briefest of that words that was spoken to you. And that's what's giving you that inspiration to push your mind further. So those spirits are always here. They're always among us. And can they help us? They can help us with any problem we have, not just environmental problems, but with any problem we have. Were there aha moments in my life? Yeah, very much so. And, I see every time when peace wins out, that those spirits must have been moving through the field. So that's sort of who they are. To us, the spiritual world isn't far away. It's always right here, right next to you all the time. It's the reason you got to be good, because you never know. That person sitting next to you could be the creator. Wow.
Okay, the next question we have is that the word Eskimo was on the map you had shown for the people of the Arctic. Isn't that a colonial name given to them rather than Inuit people?
Yeah, if you'll notice, even the Iroquois was there too. So that's it. Of course it is. It's an old map. I use it because it's one of the best maps that I can find that really sort of spreads people out and shows you who that is. I want to make a map sometime that I think in the Indigenous mapping, they've tried to do one of those maps where the borders overlap. So instead of a border being a pencil thin line, it's 40 kilometers thick, which is probably what was the right way. But when you draw that map on these big maps, what happens is the whole thing disappears because you can't tell where you're moving from Haudenosaunee territory into Anishinaabe territory. And that's the way it was in the past. As a Haudenosaunee, if I was walking north from the St. Lawrence River, there comes a point when I go, I should go talk to my Anishinaabe brothers because I'm starting to, I want to go pick berries, but I don't want to pick in their spot. So I'll go ask them where the best part to go pick. And so the same with them when they came south. They would come to a point where they would go, maybe we should talk to the Haudenosaunee because we're getting into their territory and we want to go for sturgeon in the St. Lawrence. So the borders were not the same way that you see them in Europe. And that's one of the difficulties we have because Europeans were like, there's the border. Okay, now I own on this side. And the Haudenosaunee are going, what? You know, they couldn't see that. So I can understand. I think as we mature, we'll get more back towards that idea. But the land is there to be used, not abused.
Right. Okay. Do you think the damage we have done to the earth can be repaired, and will traditional knowledge be helpful? How can Indigenous knowledge help us heal our society?
Well, I would say to you, 200 people we have online today, listening to me talk about old ways of thinking and traditional knowledge and how it does. If even one person in that bunch says to themselves, geez, I really want to help the world, then we've done an amazing thing. You know, that's an amazing move, because I dedicated myself to the world to do these things, to try to make this a better place. And you may not be working exactly on the environment, but you may be somebody who's skilled in policy, who's skilled in law, who's skilled in many other different things, an artist, a singer, you know, and go out and use your art and use your song and use your skills in a way that I can't even imagine. But you're still working towards the betterment of that world. And I think there are more and more people thinking that way, that are saying, how can I do that? And they get hung up on, well, I'm not a scientist, so I can't do anything. Well, yes, you are. You're a person, and a person can do something, even if it is the slightest thing, like attending a seminar and saying, wow, I learned something here today. Well, again, that's important. That's an important thing. I talk to kids a lot of times, and kids, when you talk to them, they say, what can we do? What can we do? We want to do something. And the first thing you say is, clean up your room. They go, what? Well, clean up your room. Make it pleasant and someplace where everybody can come in and see it as being tidy and neat. That shows that you care for your environment. Oh, I didn't know that. You know, it's not difficult to think of it is if this is your family. You know, you don't care for your family? Of course I care for my family. And I want to see that they're taken care of and that they're neat. The other side of it is, when you do this, the benefits are huge. And not only that, it's fun. You people have a hard time having fun. I find that, my God, I've been to so many meetings where everybody sits and they discuss important issues that must take place. And my God, I sit there and my mind just goes crazy. You don't find that in Indigenous people's meetings. Everybody laughs. It can be the most dire thing happening, and yet people will be laughing their heads off, because humor is one of those things that relieves the spirit, relieves the stress, allows you to move forward. Maybe we have to teach more native comedians need to come out and teach. I think that might be a good thing for you guys.
Perfect. What can an individual person do to further the understanding of traditional knowledge and Indigenous people?
I think just what I was saying there before, start to step forward. It's not all reading 15 books, unless that's what you enjoy doing. If you enjoy reading 15 books, great, I can give you a list of those. But use what your own is interested in. If you're interested in boats, go look for canoes. Canoes were amazing crafts, and see what they look like and how they operate. If you like, model trains, I had a friend of mine who said he wanted to do a diorama of the prairies, and I said, well, where are you going to put the buffalo and the natives in it? Oh, I didn't even think of that. Now he has buffaloes and natives in it. And so it doesn't sound like a lot. And this is what, you don't have to be, the king of the world and make pronouncements. You have to be a human being that reaches out to your partners. And I'll say to you that as a Haudenosaunee people, that hand of friendship has always been out. We always extended it to see if a person wished to be at peace with us. And we tried hard. You know, we had big problems with the French. We had big problems with the Spanish. But again, slowly working at it, slowly doing these things. When I was young, I told my grandfather that they should send all of the white people home. And he said to me, Henry, think about it. You know, the non-natives that live here believe they can make the land. No one can make the land, but the land can make you. And the more you live on the land and absorb that spirit of the land, you become more and more like Indigenous people. It becomes important to you. It becomes part of your family. It becomes part of your spirit. And when you start to do that, maybe you'll learn to dance. You know, we can all have dances together then, you know, and sing and drum and do those things, because those are all part of understanding where we come from. Attending things like this. I don't know how many people out there, but how many people have been to a powwow? Now, how many people have been to friendship days? I know Wata has friendship days. How many people have gone? Corn soup is wonderful stuff. You know those type of foods are there, and we also can cater to vegan people who have that. Remember, we were farmers, growing crops and things, so we know how to make up a good vegetable stew. You know, all of those things are things that you learn, but you do it person by person, and that's, I think, the most important way to do it.
That's wonderful. What do you find most rewarding by working with the IJC?
Most rewarding, I think, is listening to people and to hearing their problems. You know, we went through the 2019, 2017 high water marks. Wow. You know, and yeah, people were looking to us to control that water, but you feel like King Canute, you know, sitting on the shore, commanding the tide not to come in. There's very little that you can do. There's only 2 control structures in all of the Great Lakes. So if it rains really hard, or is a severe climate thing, you're going to be hard pressed. So what we have to start talking to people about is resilience. What do we have to do in order to make sure that these areas may not be flooded? Well, we may want to move people out of there. We may want to look at. It's not that we want to build a great big huge wall around the Great Lakes, because it just won't work. So we have to be innovative and talk and listen and work with different people. So that's what I found, you know, sort of most exciting, but also the most rewarding, as I watch that aha moment in somebody else's eyes. And they go, oh, maybe we could do this. Maybe we could increase the number of marshes around the Great Lakes. And I think to myself, wow, is that ever a big project? We thought we were just going to do something little. No, this guy wants to do the whole of the Great Lakes. Might work. Let's see what we can come up with.
Okay, so this next question starts off with a very complimentary compliment to you, that you're a very skilled storyteller. Indigenous people's connections to the environment is clearly evident. How can local groups like associations make connections with Indigenous communities?
Well, what I always do, what I always tell, for example, with the model forest, the St. Lawrence River Institute, I said, don't be afraid to go to our functions that are public and are open to people. You know, that's sort of the first thing. Do your homework, find out who's in your area. If there are books written about them, read them, look at them. The same way you would do research. I always laugh, because if we were to send a delegation of people to Japan, the first thing we do is we invite experts in who know Japan. And they go, well, you know, you have to bow, you have to do this, you have to do that. Oh, by the way, don't put their business card in your back pocket. And you go, why? because you're showing disrespect. You're putting it next to your bum, and that's not a good thing. So you'd go, what? I didn't know that. Well, that's, you can learn. And there are numbers of people out there that are willing to teach you and to show you how to do this. So don't be afraid, move forward. I always use the example of my kids when they were young. One of them, my daughter, asked me, what happens if we get lost? I said, if you're in a big shopping mall and you get lost, I said, look for the lady with the bluest hair. Nice blue-haired lady. Look for her. And then you go tell her that you're lost. And my daughter said, why? I said, because she'll be an elderly lady, and when she hears that you're lost, she's going to want to take care of you. Oh, okay. Sure enough, doesn't she get lost? She went and looked for the blue-haired lady and found her. And of course, what did she say? She was a grandmother. She went, oh my God, we got to find your parents. Took her under the wing, and off they went to wherever they had to go. And then over the loudspeaker, we heard, this is in the East Edmonton Mall. Would Mr. and Mrs. Lickers please come to such and such? Your daughter is here. And so there she is, sitting with this dearest old woman with the ice cream and saying, hi, Daddy. You got lost. So now we found you. Why do we scare our people? Why are people so scared? Yeah, she could have been an axe murderer, but I doubt it. Once in 100 million. So reach out, take the chance. I think what you'll find is that there's people that are waiting for you.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time. And the very last question I'm going to ask you is about your beautiful shirt. You could just tell us a little bit about it, why you wear it. And that will be the end of our question period.
Yeah, well, these are called ribbon shirts, the same way that women wear ribbon skirts. The men wore ribbon shirts. What's interesting to me is that if you look at birds, the male bird with his plumage is always brilliant. And my grandmother used to say, yeah, that's because he gets taken by the predator first, not the drab little female that's sitting back in the bush. He's out there, strutting around. But it was a sign of respect from our women to our men that they would look good. There's lots and lots of stories about the ribbon shirts. My ribbon shirts, like I say, are made by my wife. She makes them for me. This one here is a name shirt, which means that the shirt, if you look on my back, there's usually 4 ribbons or ribbons that come down. One of the ribbons is removed. And the reason for that is it's a Parks Canada shirt. It's the shirt that I wore when we were doing ecological integrity of Canada's national parks. So I named the shirt. So if I'm out someplace and a person looks and says, hey, you've lost the ribbon. No, didn't lose it. This is what this shirt is called. This is what I was doing. It's to show respect for that. I have other ribbon shirts that have ribbons removed that are named for an individual or a person. So when somebody asks, I tell them the story of that person, and it keeps their memory alive among all of our people. So the shirts were important, and they look good. If you see a lot of the old Haudenosaunee and some of the others, you'll see really quite colorful shirts that they wore. And some people said, wow, it'd be kind of hard to sneak through the bushes with those. Yeah, it would, but you can just put a blanket on the top of it and nobody will see it. So, but I use it today. It's formal wear for me. I use it to honor the people I'm talking to and to show people that I feel privileged to be here and to be able to speak with me. So.
Meg Rich, thank you.
That's great, Henry. Thank you very much. I just like to ask Norman and Jordan to turn their cameras on. So Henry, while you were talking in the chat of the webinar, there's just some comments, and I just wanted to read a few to you because they're directly to you and you might not see them otherwise. But so there's one. I do hope that this webinar would be posted to be seen again. I am so sorry we didn't have the opportunity to share it with young people I know across Canada. It would be helpful for their studies and their work and overall outlook. Much thanks. Another one that says, thank you so much, most enjoyable. Another one, miigwech to Elder Henry, a really, really good session. Niwan Henry and Niwan Norman for putting this series together. One person just sent a red heart, and that's all, no message. Thank you for sharing your incredibly insightful words and knowledge with us, and many thanks for your teachings. So some great comments, Henry, and you know, we're so fortunate to have you and grateful for you coming today. And I'd like to thank Norman as well for being the catalyst for this entire webinar series. Norman, do you want to say anything before we go?
I just want to, two things. Thank everyone for participating, and I hope you learned as much from this whole series as I did. I admit I knew virtually nothing. And so when you know virtually nothing, it's possible to learn a fair bit in the first 4 or 5 hours when you open your mind and your heart to listening, which I did. I've certainly learned, my whole concept of knowledge has actually been changed. Somehow I initially kept on thinking, where's the technical knowledge bit? And it really didn't get mentioned by Henry or by Sue or by David or by Neil and his panelists. What they really were mentioning is, let's start by looking at the world the right way and over the right period of time, and get everyone to agree on an appropriate way to look at the world. And if we can do that, everything else will really become a little bit easier. And that is initially what I've taken away from this. And what I hope will happen, John and Henry and Anne and Jordan and everyone, is that we can take what we've learned over the last 5 webinars and see if we really can build something permanent at the Steamships and Discovery Center. As Gary has said, it'll take some fundraising, but I really think we have the nucleus of something quite special here. And I also thank my dog for not barking for the last 5 minutes. Okay, all.
Thanks, Norman. Yeah, we're already talking about a permanent exhibit for sure. We've got such great content, and we're looking forward to planning that, and we hope that you'll help us do that. So I'd like to thank Jordan Waynes, our Assistant General Manager, and Ann Curley, our Operations Manager and Curator, also for all their work on this webinar. So thanks, guys. Thanks very much. And just a brief plug for our next webinar. We don't have dates yet, but it's our next webinar is a collaboration between Antique and Classic Boat Society and Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center. It's called Grace and Speed, Muskoka's Wooden Boats in Motion. And it's an online 8-episode series featuring video of the boats in motion, interviews with their owners, historical context, and Q&A. So soon, so you'll see it on our website, and we'll get it out to all our databases as soon as we can. So again, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Henry, very much, and have a good evening, everyone.